So welcome everyone to the 17th Thought Leadership Session. My name is Jason White. I'm the President and CEO of the National Range Workforce Collaborative. If this is the first time you're joining us, our Thought Leadership series is really our way of encouraging continuous learning in the field, where every quarter we get together on one national platform to elevate some of the leading practices, strategies, and approaches that are really making an impact in the field. And today I'm super excited to have this and moderate this session behind the background check. And the matter of fact, the Professional Background Screening Association did a study of HR professionals across the country. And I have three things here that are very interesting that I'd like to share regarding background checks. So 95% of US employers actually conduct employment background screening, and 77% of US employers have a documented background check policy in place. What's also interesting is that criminal background checks are one of the most types of checks that are done, 94%. However, background checks are often misunderstood. And when you think about the process, oftentimes many individuals don't understand what the process is and how to utilize the results. So today we're fortunate to have some experts that are going to be joining today. I'm really excited to actually invite Brenda Mayers she's a product and regulatory specialist at Checkr. She's also joined by one of her colleagues, Berkeley Pfeiffer, who actually serves as a litigation counsel from Checkr as well. And we have Jody Anderson, who is the co-founder from Rezme. Really excited to have these folks online. But before we go into the conversation, I just want to highlight a few things. One, we would love to hear from you. If you have any questions, please do put it in the, not in the chat pod, but in the Q&A pod. We would love to be able to compile those questions. We're going to be answering those at the end. We would love to leave some time at the end to answer those questions. However, please do ask your questions as the webinar unfolds. At the end of the session, we're going to be doing a survey. We would love to hear from you. So there's going to be a box that's popping up on your screen. If you could just hit a response to those answers, we'd love to be able to get your input. So today, again, we're joined by an exciting panel of experts. And at this time, I want to kind of start with Jody. If you could introduce yourself, and you have a very unique role that you're playing on this panel. You're a person with lived experience, you're a practitioner, and you've actually founded Rezme. So we're excited to hear a little bit about your background, why you actually got into this work, and how that journey has been. Jody, could you share a little bit about yourself, please?
No, I appreciate that, Jason, and thank you everyone for coming, for sure showing up on a Friday. Happy Friday. Shout out to Brenda and Berkeley, true heroes and teammates of mine. I'm Jody Anderson Jr. I was actually incarcerated as a youth, so from 15 to 25, spent a number of years inside of various maximum, juvenile, and adult prisons. I had the good fortune of joining Cornell University's prison education program. I graduated from there, earned my freedom about 6 years early, attended Cornell for about 9 months, and then transferred to Stanford University on a full academic scholarship. And even with those accolades, was unable to get a job just running into background check failures, mainly through automated rejections. And it wasn't until I was being recruited by Reddit that I found out that there are different background check companies with different practices and different ways to set up their technology in order to not inadvertently discriminate against people with records. That background check company was Checkr. I found out that there's such thing as fair chance ordinances. There's lots of protections for individuals with criminal records in a number of major cities, and was able to work with Checkr and Reddit to get my first job right after undergrad. Incredible experience getting into tech. That's how I broke into tech. And then I realized at that moment that there are millions of other people who are going through the same thing every day, and companies, those who don't use Checkr and other advanced technologies don't have their systems configured in a way to actually enable individuals who are well qualified to actually get an opportunity to engage in the economy in a meaningful way. So after working there for that summer, I went back to grad school to actually build a technical solution in the space. And that brings us here today.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us, Jody. Just fascinating to kind of watch the evolution of your work. That being said, one of the things that you mentioned as you were sharing is that you have different background checks companies. But if we were to think about a process of what's really behind the background check, right? Would love to get some thoughts from Checkr about what that process actually looks like, even as we help our attendees to understand what that process looks like.
Sure, I can speak to that a little bit. Thanks for attending, everyone, today. There are various parts of the background check that we're going to dive a little bit deeper into later in the session, but we wanted to start off with just kind of a general overview of the process and the various steps that occur. The background check process typically kicks in after a conditional job offer is made. In other words, after a candidate has been determined to be otherwise qualified for the position. The background check process begins by the employer ordering a background check from a credit reporting agency, or you might hear me refer to it as a CRA, like Checkr or others. The employer must collect consent from the candidate to have the background check run. Once that consent is collected and various personal identifying information about the candidate is collected, the CRA, such as Checkr, gathers information about the candidate. The types of information that is gathered will vary based on both applicable laws and also on what the customer cares about, what the customer wants to see. We'll talk about this in more detail later in the session, but the types of information that you typically see are various types of public record information, such as criminal records, DMV data, etc. Once we receive the order, the information is compiled about the candidate, and then it's analyzed in order to prepare the consumer report or the background check. In this process, various filters are applied to the information, such as compliance filters, to ensure that we are reporting in line with applicable law, namely the FCRA. We also employ quality assurance techniques to ensure that we are reporting with maximum possible accuracy. Once the report is final, it is shared with both the candidate and the employer, and presumably the employer then evaluates the result of the report against their hiring criteria. And then at that point, the employer will decide whether to engage the candidate or not. There are various consumer protections that exist that will come into play if the employer intends to make a negative hiring decision based on the background check. But we will get into those later on in the webinar.
Awesome. Awesome. So Jody, you have an interesting solution that connects in some regards with this process as well. Could you share a little bit about how Rezme works?
No, for sure. So a huge component of our platform is informing candidates of their rights when it comes to employment. So we like to help candidates prepare a response to what is going to amount to be a background check failure. So we provide them with that legal intelligence depending on where they're living at, which jurisdiction they're applying for a job in. And then once they do get this conditional offer and they give consent for the background check and it comes back negative, they then have the opportunity to respond. So we help them assemble their documentation, whether that's reaching out to like mentors, helping them collect evidence of rehabilitation, evidence of employability, activities that they've engaged in with the community, things they've done on the inside, post-incarceration, what they're doing currently, and then compile all of that into what we call a restorative record as a response to any form of pre-adverse or adverse notice. That goes back to the employer. So we're typically integrated with an employer's HR system so that we can increase efficiency throughout this process. That communication goes to the employer. They're able to conduct an individualized assessment or whatever is required by state, local regulations, and then make sure they're not violating the candidate's rights, and then creating a more holistic and a process to actually have individuals not only advocate for themselves, but demonstrate their employability and their fitness for the position.
Wonderful. So, I mean, when I think about what you just shared and the solution that you're providing, in some regards, it sounds like you're empowering the job seekers to kind of understand their rights and how to engage with the employer, but also equipping the employers as well, right, with the type of insight that they need to make a more informed decision. So that's awesome. Okay. All right, Kimberly, could transition to the next slide. I would love to hear a little bit more from Checkr. Okay. So let me do this. So as you know, background checks can sometimes get interesting, right? In terms of as we think through the implication for a person with a criminal record, right? Oftentimes it's the decision between whether a person is able to pursue their career versus if they're able to not actually get a job. So here we have oftentimes some adverse results that show up on some of these background checks. So could you talk a little bit more about this, help our audience to understand what actions should be taken after an adverse result it happens?
Sure. So again, there are, laws that protect consumers in the instance that an employer is considering taking a negative hiring decision based on the results of the background check.
Yeah.
There are two big protections under federal law. The first is there is an option that we call the dispute process, where candidates are afforded the opportunity to dispute whatever information is on their background check. A lot of times this comes up in the context of if court records are not up to date, if, the background check returns records associated with someone maybe with the same name, same birthday, lives in the same city, but it's a different person, things like that. So under the FCRA, they are guaranteed this ability to file a dispute with the credit reporting agency. So Checkr handles a lot of those disputes. The other main protection, which is shown on this slide, is something called the adverse action process. If an employer is intending to make a negative hiring decision based on whatever it is that's in the background check, legally they're required to send what's called a pre-adverse action notice to the candidate. These are letters that say, we're intending to make a negative hiring decision based on, and then usually they identify whatever it is, whether it's charges or something else. The candidate then has an opportunity to respond to that pre-adverse action notice, oftentimes by providing, information about rehabilitation or just disputing the record itself, etc. And then if, hopefully the employer will then reverse the decision, but if they don't, then the consumer has a right to a post-adverse action letter. So it's similar to the pre-adverse action letter, but this one says, we're not hiring you, for these reasons, and then it identifies information.
Berkeley, thank you so much for that insight. 95% of US-based employers that actually do some form of background screening, right? A person with a criminal record, and I know many individuals personally, many of these individuals are my very close friends. And oftentimes the idea of a background check brings anxiety, right? That being said, when you think of also about a background check company, sometimes there is a certain perception around what that company actually does. Now, the more I learn about Checkr, the more I'm actually impressed with some of the things that Checkr has been doing to differentiate themselves from maybe some of the stereotypical way of background checks or background check companies are viewed. Brenda, I'm curious to hear some of the unique things that Checkr is doing and for our audience to hear about today.
Thank you so much for having us here today. Super excited to talk about Checkr and why they're unique. So I will just start by saying that Checkr's core mission it's also fair chance. So we are a fair chance employer. 83% of executives believe that their companies created an unbiased, inclusive hiring process. But we know that's not necessarily true. Checkr's Fair Chance talent represents 5% of our employees. And that's compared to 22% for the rest of the company. So that's a large percentage, and we're actually really proud of that. We're committed to being part of the solution and not just talking about it. So a couple of the things that Checkr has implemented from a product standpoint that benefits our Fair Chance partners is that we have something called Assess. And in the last 5 years, we've helped unblock over 5 million job applicants who may not have gotten work due to criminal records. And a company can have multiple assess options. So what the assess does is it allows you to put parameters around certain jobs. For example, you may not care if someone has a valid driver's license if they're not in a driving role. Or you may care if someone has a financial crime on their record if they're going to be in your accounting team. So it kind of allows you to set some parameters up front. And then we also have something called candidate stories. Roughly 1/3 of working age Americans have criminal records. So it's important for candidates to be able to talk about their story. This increases diversity and inclusion, and we're really excited that we've been able to implement this. More than 180,000 job applicants have been able to submit their story and continue with the hiring process. So it's crucial just to have the conversation with those candidates. And then the last thing I'll say about Checkr is we've signed the 1% pledge. We did that in 2021, which is a promise that we're going to invest 1% of employee time, products, equity, profits per year to our Fair Chance mission. So some ways that we've done that is we created an apprenticeship program for justice impacted candidates. And we've had a 90% success rate with our first cohort, which was piloted in 2023. And we've since launched 2 others. We've also partnered with a firm, and we just felt like it was really important that people understand what their rights are around expungements and having certain criminal records removed from their background. And we were able to help 1,000 records be expunged. And then through our foundation, we have also provided grants for Fair Chance community organizations. The very last thing, which I think is incredibly impactful and we encourage everyone to participate in, is we have an online re-entry simulator so that you can experience a few of the 44,000 collateral consequences that people with records face. So the unemployment rate for formerly incarcerated topped 27% in 2024. So just for reference, the unemployment rate for the entire US in July of this year was 4%. So it's really important to go through these simulators to kind of understand what justice impacted individuals face. And then you can work with your company to create some things to help.
Awesome, Brenda. I appreciate all you shared. And I must say this, Checkr is also a sponsor of the NRWC conference. So not only are you doing all of those things to include developing products that make it more streamlined so that more job candidates can actually qualify for employment, but you're also investing in the space and encouraging convenings and other things that are happening. So thank you so much for sharing that. Okay. So you have a candidate that actually goes through the process of getting a background check, right? What information appears on the background check, and how do employers actually interpret the results? Good, Gummy.
I can start off by speaking at a relatively high level about this, and then maybe Brenda can go into talking about some of the specific categories of information you'll see. So the information that appears on the background check, as I believe I already previewed, is regulated by state and local laws. The federal statute is the FCRA, or the Fair Credit Reporting Act. In many instances, states have also enacted legislation that provides additional protections on top of the federal protections that exist. Given the differences between, state by state, I'm just going to focus on the federal protections though. So the FCRA has guidance for what may or may not appear on a background check. One big thing is that it requires CRAs such as Checkr to implement what they call reasonable procedures to ensure maximum possible accuracy on the background check, which basically means we have to have procedures to ensure the information being reported is as accurately as we possibly can. In practice, one of the consequences of this is that reportable information is typically coming from the public record. It's not, word of mouth information, gossip, opinion, stuff like that. Thank God. The types of public record information that you will often see on the background check are criminal record information, employment and education verification, credit history, driving records, other categories, which I think Brenda will talk about in more specifics in a bit. The FCRA also imposes certain restrictions on reporting that publicly available information. So even within the realm of public information, not everything can be reported on there. Expunged records, sealed records, otherwise legally restricted records are not reportable. Another big restriction is that any type of negative information at all, with the exception of convictions, is only reportable for 7 years. So anything that is not a conviction, such as an arrest, cannot be reported after 7 years. Brenda, do you want to talk about the specifics a little bit?
Sure, thank you, Berkeley. So at a really high level, most background checks can consist of criminal, federal, civil, and MVR. So to break that down a little bit, criminal background checks are going to show convictions, pending charges, and sometimes arrests, which it's going to vary by the state. And then for a federal background check, it's going to reveal crimes like tax evasion, immigration violations, or crimes that cross state lines. Employers typically view these as a little bit more serious due to the federal jurisdiction, and it's often required for government positions or for roles that require security clearances. And then we have civil background checks. That's going to be your lawsuits, judgments, liens, bankruptcies. Employers might be more interested in these when they're evaluating someone for a financial position or roles that handle money. And then you have the motor vehicle records, and this is going to show driving violations, license status, which is really important. You want to know that someone has a valid driver's license, and potentially accidents. So this is going to be more critical for those driving positions. And then how you interpret the results, like we talked about a little bit earlier, employers should consider job relatedness, as well as time elapsed, pattern of behavior, candidate explanation. We do have many that use individualized assessments rather than blanket disqualifications. So that's kind of your high level things that you might see in a background check.
Awesome. Thank you, Brenda. One of the things that you mentioned as you were sharing is that the laws vary by state, right, and how it's handled. Jody, one thing I've learned about you is you're our expert in looking at different state law, studying those law, and being on top of them to provide the most up-to-date law information on the law to your clients and job seekers. Could you share a little bit about how state and federal laws impact the process?
No, for sure. There's I think the fair chance, hiring, second chance, hiring movement is widespread across the entire country, but there are varying degrees on how that's implemented and how that's interpreted. And so you'll see even at the state level, every state has a different version of ban the box, which affords candidates different protections, right, and different rights when it comes to employment, housing, et cetera. And on the other side of the equation with employers, it mandates a particular set of workflows or requirements that they have to complete in order to be in compliance with their particular version of ban the box or fair chance legislation. And so what we try to do is ingest that legal intelligence from the law, and then engage with candidates so that they know in real time, okay, if you are applying for a job here or you live here, you're under this zip code, these are your rights, right? This is the process that you're going to have to go through. Here's what each stage means for you. Here's what that means for the employer. Here are their obligations. And then, which is often the case, in the event that something goes awry, not through some malevolent or malicious intent, but let's say someone's rights are being violated, or the process wasn't handled properly, they then are given the contact information to either interact with the Department of Labor or some other department that's supposed to help them along the way.
Wow, that's awesome. Again, earlier, I remember when you were talking about your role in all of this, the idea of empowering the job seeker. And the more I hear that's what I'm hearing. And yeah, I just want to thank you for doing that. I'm curious to hear if Brenda have anything to add to that thought.
Yeah, I mean, Jody, what you guys are doing is amazing. There's so many different laws and just helping people to understand what those are. One thing that you mentioned that I would like to maybe expand on a little bit is ban the box. It's a term that you hear a lot in this space, and maybe you don't really understand what it is. So for any of those that don't understand, when you give someone a job application, there is a little box on there, or has been in the past, that would say, do you have a criminal record? And so ban the box is a law that gets rid of that on the job application. We actually like this. It prevents employers from asking about those criminal records up front, and it gives a candidate with a criminal history a fair chance, we love that word, to demonstrate their qualifications first, rather than just automatically being disqualified before their skills and experience are even considered. So we like this, and we're really excited for all the stuff that you're doing, Jody. Thank you.
Awesome. Brenda, thank you so much for underscoring fair chance. On that topic, I really want to hear from Berkeley. Now, Berkeley, if you could talk about what are the rights of the job seeker as it pertains to background checks?
Sure. I kind of covered this already up top, but the two main under federal law that I can think of at least are the dispute process, where candidates can and should, dispute anything that they think is inaccurate on their record, and then the adverse action process as well, where, if nothing else, candidates are at least being given notice that there's potentially going to be a negative hiring decision based on, XYZ record, and B, there was a negative hiring decision. So in the interest of not just repeating myself there, the other thing I can think of is that, oftentimes court records are not up to date, or they're wrong, or they haven't taken into account various protections that have come into play since the crime was committed, or since the record appeared. And so I think just doing a little bit of research and digging to understand what's out there in terms of options for sealing, expunging, getting charges, taken down from a felony to a misdemeanor, whatever. Just looking around for those options and trying to pursue them to the extent possible. In addition to getting court records changed if they are actually just wrong, because that happens more often than you might expect. So.
Wow, man, it's amazing. Imagine having wrong information on your record and you're penalized as a result of that. I think that's a very good segue actually for this question that I'm curious to even get Jody's thoughts on. But we have a lot of providers on this call, right? So how do we prepare? How do providers prepare job candidates to actually be able to advocate for themselves? And especially when you think about the background check process. Jody, curious to hear if you have any thoughts on this.
No, for sure. I hope this isn't as provocative as it has been in the past, earlier occasions. But I am of the opinion, not just me, but our entire startup, is that we live in the information age, and information is absolutely out there, right?
Mm.
Even if people don't go through a background check provider to get that legally, like Google is a thing, right? So you're one search away from someone finding something out anyway. And so our perspective is that an individual should have a proactive response. Not that they're going to deploy it voluntarily at every moment during the hiring stage, but that when they come to this moment where something on their background has been revealed, they weren't able to get it expunged or thrown out or sealed, and it is showing up, that they then have some kind of response to that. Here is what I have done since. Here is what this has meant for my life. Here's how I tried to turn this around. Here's how I'm giving back to the community. Here's how I've, engaged in the economy. Here's what I've done in the educational sector, et cetera. So we think you should take a proactive approach all the way.
Awesome. So again, being ready, right? Being ready to engage, being ready to make a case for why you are not just able to do the job, but trustworthy or have been rehabilitated. So thank you for doing that. Now, you touched on this a little bit, Jody, but I want to kind of open up the floor to discuss this a little bit more because I've heard some varying views on this. But when we think about discussing records, right? What are some of the best practice for discussing records with employer? Because at some point, especially if a background check is a part of the process and there's something that's found, how do we engage? How does that job candidate engage with the employer on the topic?
There are a few ways I think this could happen. I've seen employers will make a phone call to just understand more about what happened. There's that approach. And so if you're able to do that, you have the opportunity. I think being forthright, giving more context, right? Background check is very hard to read unless you went to law school or you were working in the criminal legal system. And so I think providing some additional context is helpful. What has also been really powerful, we've seen from candidates that we've worked with, is having other individuals in your network help advocate for you. So letters of recommendation, because you'll be able to borrow some of that social capital, right? Or places you volunteered at, just getting those references, and then having the employer read those too, because then they're understanding a bit more about you besides what they're saying on the background report. And of course, we have our own products that do that convey this narrative, that collect all that documentation. But one thing I did want to double down on is you only have a limited period of time to respond legally, right? And Berkeley and Brenda were explaining this. And so I think having that collateral ready for when the critical time period is happening, you do have a response and you've thought about this. And this isn't the first time you've had this conversation with someone, right? Or even with yourself. And so I think you'll be poised to do much better. You'll have more convincing power and really, display who you are as a person more holistically.
Awesome. So I'm hearing a few themes that you've shared here, Jody. Number one, be ready, right? You got to be ready. As you said, you have a very short window to respond. You want to respond in an effective way. The second thing is provide context, right? Almost anything is easy to sound worse than it is without providing context. And then the third thing is advocate find someone to be able to advocate on your behalf. The third point here connects directly with one of the things that we encourage when we work with providers who work with people who are impacted by the justice system. Just the idea of they're serving as brokers of trust, right? So you really want to be able to have someone who can say you are trustworthy, you are able to follow through on whatever those job responsibilities are. And oftentimes community partners, community groups, close friends, a connection that works for the company, right? all of those things actually help. I'm just curious to hear if Brenda and Berkeley has anything else to add to that. But before we do that, we're getting very close, folks, to get to the Q&A section. So if you have a question, please do share it in the Q&A pod. I notice a bunch of questions are coming through, which is exciting. Brenda, Berkeley, if you have anything else to add to this, would love to hear.
Yeah, I'm just gonna say from like a final advice kind of thing.
Hmm.
Um, I think that fair chance can be scary for companies that aren't currently doing it.
Hmm.
And I just wanted to throw some statistics out there to help you maybe feel a little bit more comfortable. So there was a 2022 study that found that diverse companies earned 2.5 times higher cash flow per employee, and inclusive teams were 35% more productive.
Hmm.
So please don't, count someone out just because they might have a record. And I'll also say over 600,000 Americans transition out of prison every year.
Hmm.
So I know that the whole process can be complex, it can be a little scary, but engage with your background check provider and expert partners like Jody, just to make sure that you have the most effective process. And by fostering these open communications and collaborations, I think that, we can make some positive changes.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brenda, for that. I'm curious to, actually, I should say, I appreciate you giving even advice. I'm even curious to hear if Berkeley has any final advice, whether for an employer or for a practitioner in the room that works with justice impacted job seeker, or even the job seeker themselves. And Jody, if you have any final advice, please jump in as well. We have a bunch of questions for you folks that our attendees have shared. So Berkeley.
Yeah, I think most of my advice has really already been covered. I think the two big things are make sure the court records are accurate and know your rights, right? Like there are a lot of legal options that are out there that people just don't know about. So, talk to a lawyer if you can. Find there's a lot of great pro bono organizations where you can call a legal hotline, right? And talk to a lawyer in some context to get, advice on how to get things off your record. And then also, collect, like Jody was saying, collect all the evidence you can of rehabilitation, positive impact, reasons why, you exemplify all the factors that suggest decreased rates of recidivism, all that kind of stuff. So.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Berkeley. Jody, I know you gave some very good pointers already. Anything else?
No, I think we'll answer a ton of it in the Q&A. So I'm ready to dive into it. Let's do it.
Okay. All right. Well, let's go to the questions. I'm going to go ahead and jump in here. First question here is from Brandon. What would a candidate who has recently had an expungement completed do to make sure that their background is updated accurately? That's a great question, by the way. Excellent question.
I can add a little bit here. One thing to keep in mind when you go through the expungement process is that having the record actually removed from the court system is going to take a little bit of time. So I wouldn't expect to get an expungement this week and then have my background check run next week and it be gone. So one of the things that I would say would be to just keep following up with the court to make sure that they're actually removing the record.
Awesome. Following up with the court. Thank you. Thank you for that. The next question here is actually from Michael and Jody. This looks like it's for you. It says, is the concept of a restorative record something that is unique to Rezme and their approach or language, or is that a best practice in the reentry space as a whole?
Yeah, I would always say we try to build on the shoulders of giants. So every product that we've ever made has been because of the reentry community has figured out something, and then we build in that space. So it definitely came from the community. We were incubated at Cornell University in their labor school, and had seen a number of fair chance hiring ordinances. They have 7 factors that you're supposed to consider whenever someone has had a criminal record. So, you know, there's the green factors, there's also evidence of rehabilitation, how old were they when they, ran into this trouble, is there a public safety interest, et cetera. And then we took all of those factors and tried to enable the candidate to create content or submit evidence that would answer those questions. So an employer is conducting an assessment, a robust one. The candidate has already supplied information to those factors. And so it's built around a bit of a legal framework as well. So as a function of filling that out for the candidate, if the candidate fills out a restorative record and that gets submitted to an employer, and no matter which region an employer is operating in, they're looking to answer a particular set of questions, the candidate has submitted information for them to consider in terms of their employability, rehabilitation, and character fitness.
Awesome. I really appreciate the unique space that role that you play in the space. There is a question here from an anonymous person. They want to kind of learn a little bit more about your revenue model. My assumption is that they want to use your platform where they're asking this, and they wanted to kind of understand like how does your enterprise sustain itself?
That's from us, Rezme, right?
Yeah, Rezme.
Yeah. So all the costs that you would think a candidate would have are offset by an employer. So employers pay for custom workflows around recruiting, around fair chance hiring, et cetera. And so we build those workflows directly into their HR system. And so the employer is paying for that. And then because individuals often belong to targeted groups or groups that historically had trouble getting into the labor market, they're eligible for work opportunity tax credits. So we help do the pre-filing of those candidates for employers and then take a percentage of that as well. And that's how it's free for the community.
Awesome. Wonderful. Thank you. Yeah, every business has to sustain itself. So it's good that you have a clear idea in terms of how you do that. Awesome. So here, Dorinda is one of our faithful volunteers. I know this person who's asking this question. I'm assuming this is directed towards Checkr. Here's a question. It says, do you work with employers to follow the Equal Employment Opportunity Law to make sure they're doing background checks based on the job duties compared to the criminal convictions?
I can speak to that, at least initially. So, I mean, look, we can't instruct people on what practices they want to implement, right? Like that's ultimately something that's their decision. However, we do try. We have a number of different, manners by which we do that. We try to just create educational content that goes to, how successful justice impacted people can be in the workplace. We also, within the assess product that Brenda was talking about earlier, we have, I think, what's called fair chance settings or something like that, where employers can, easily choose to just turn on this group of settings that is intended to be in line with current EEOC guidance on fair chance hiring. So, the short answer to your question is we do what we can. Yeah. Brenda, I don't know if you have anything to add to that, but.
Yeah, so this is actually a topic that I was really excited to talk about that we didn't dive into deeper. I'm just going to add real quick that there are steps that you can take as an organization. One, you can use a program like Assess, like we talked about before. Even if you don't use something like that, some steps that you can take as an organization is just to define the job-related risk first. So identify what specific criminal history would actually impact the job performance. That's something that we talked about earlier, driving offenses for driving positions. And then use an individualized assessment. So don't automatically disqualify and do these kind of blanket things like anyone with a felony can't work for us. You need to consider things that are like time that's elapsed, severity of the charges, rehabilitation efforts, and again, how does it relate to the job? So you can create some policies and establish guidelines for how to work within those requirements.
Awesome. Thank you. The questions keep flowing in. So I have a bunch of questions that I'm going to keep throwing at you. Here's a question from Selena. So it says that we hear from many HR reps that they don't see a candidate's report. They just receive a pass-fail from the background check company. Many don't even know what they accept or don't accept. What would you suggest, you recommend to these companies to be more fair chance? And how should they engage with their background check companies to be more aware of their hiring boundaries? It's a very interesting question. I'm not sure who want to jump in and
I
share any thoughts.
definitely want to pass it to the Checkr team at some point, but I give an example in New York City. We had a partner working with in New York City. They are bound by New York State Correctional Law 23A for all the lawyers on the call, and that required them to conduct a very vigorous, like, individualized assessment. Had 8 different factors you have to consider, etc. The background check provider they were using was not Checkr, so there isn't a fair chance like portal, none of the assessments, like none of that is in there. And so we built a custom workflow into their Workday instance. That's the HR system they were using. And then because the background check provider sits adjacent to that process, informed them that the client wanted to reorder their matrix, their background check matrix, and change what comes in and what is deemed yellow or red, green, etc. And then for all the ones that were yellow and red, then that would trigger our system to make sure that the employer wasn't violating someone's rights and was following the correctional law 23A protocol. So because you pay the background check provider, right, like they have to do what you need in order for you to run your business. And if you need your background check matrix to be changed, you need certain triggers and workflows to work around them or work with them. Like, you can do that because you're paying to the Checkr team, because they have those products and features more deeply embedded into their core offerings to begin with.
Excellent. I mean, you continue to kind of validate the fact that Checkr has separated itself in the field. Thank you for that feedback. There's a follow-up actually for you from, I missed my name, from Beth. Jody, this is directed towards you, and said, do you collect data on how effective it is for a candidate to actually provide additional information? So in other words, when it comes up with that adverse results, what is the success rate for a candidate that actually follow up and provide additional information? Do you have any thoughts, any data at all on that?
Yeah, so we've seen a 20% lift just in, like, them getting a job. There's also the confidence to keep applying because now they have a response. And so we haven't measured, like, the psychological impact of going after opportunities you otherwise wouldn't. Sounds like a bit of a counterfactual, but we think that that's it there. Also, individuals who have, been discriminated against in a housing or educational context, like, they're now going after those opportunities as well. And so just being able to use the platform to solve similar issues in different areas of their lives has been something we've seen positive trend in overall, even outside the employment context.
Awesome. Thank you. I have another question here from Retta, I should say. It says, I have seen individuals advise people to disclose with more detail than what I am comfortable actually disclosing. So it sounds like he has lived experience. So for example, it is okay to say, I do have something in my background that resulted in the loss of a human life. I feel that can be more damaging than helpful. So in some regards, I think what Rita is getting at here is how much is appropriate to disclose. What type of advice would you give?
I wish I had the answer to this. I think it's more of a personal choice. There is the argument that sometimes people disclose information that wouldn't appear on a background check report. So I think making that calculus is an individual one for sure.
And I think that ties into the first advice that you guys gave, which is the importance of finding out what's showing up on the background check, right? So that, I guess, if there's something that's not necessary to share, they're informed to do that. I'm curious, even Brenda, Berkeley, any thoughts on that? How much should be shared? And it's okay to say you don't necessarily have anything to add here. I'm just curious.
I feel the same way Jody does. I wish I had an answer. I think it's going to come down to what you're comfortable with.
Got it. Okay. Any thoughts, Berkeley? No. Okay.
Not really any additional thoughts. I think it's just a judgment call, which I know is an annoying answer, but it's just the truth, you know.
Absolutely, absolutely. I could see that. I'm curious. Tracy has this question. Maybe it would be great to have more elaboration on it. But as we switch to remote work, right? How has that really impacted maybe the utilization of background checks? As that increases the need and interest in background checks from companies or not?
The question is, has remote work increased the reliance on background?
Yes, increases the demand for background checks. Has companies been doing that more because of we're now in a remote world that we're working in?
That's an interesting question, and frankly, something that I've never thought of before, but it makes sense, right? Because I feel like nowadays, at least from what I've observed, the hiring process, involves less face-to-face interaction than it used to, right? Like even when I came to Checkr, a lot of my interviews were on Zoom. So I can imagine that because of that, maybe there's more of a reliance on the background check, but that's just me speculating. I don't actually know.
Got it. Thanks for sharing your thoughts there. There's a question here from Michelle. I encourage my clients to follow up with an employer and ask why they didn't get hired or what can they do to make themselves more qualified for a position. Has anyone encouraged someone who has a record to call back and speak with the employer? And do you think this might be beneficial?
Yeah, I always look at this in the context of like this isn't your only shot at getting this particular job, or if you're going to work in that industry, then I think having more connections, having more insight into how you can increase your employability is like super important. And then also a lot of jobs are referrals. Like you get referred by someone who's already in the industry. And I think even if you don't land the role at that particular job, the employer may know of another opportunity where you would be a better fit, or the recruiter can help out at a later date. But I always encourage like to follow up and to get that rationale. There's also a legal argument that like in certain jurisdictions, the employer has to tell you the reason that you weren't able to get the job. And so I think it's important to try to get that information as well, even for those purposes. But I do like the development approach, like seeing it more as like an opportunity either to learn more or get more connected, and then possibly follow that at like a later date when a more viable opportunity opens up.
Absolutely. You know, I mean, with the job searching process, it's actually a relationship building process, right? So any form of conversation and inquiry could even plant seeds for future opportunity. So thank you for sharing that. Aisha has a question here on a very touchy topic in just in the country, in our space for sure. And the question is actually regarding tier 3 sex offense. Is there anything in the application they're asking how would these applications help support tier 3 sex offenders? Any thoughts on that at all?
I feel like this is going to be primarily a question for Jody, but I can speak from the Checkr side. We, as Brenda mentioned earlier, we have this option called candidate stories where candidates can share, a context to their records, additional information, evidence of rehabilitation, etc. So most of the instances that I've come across where people are sexual offenders, you see a lot of that content being provided, evidence that they sought therapy for years, stuff like that.
Got it.
Yeah.
And I think it connects with the broader idea of showing rehabilitation, right? I think that's what I hear you communicating, Berkeley, at least to some extent.
Yeah, the other thing I'll mention is that you know, some employers more than others are willing to do an individualized assessment of each candidate and
Mm-hmm.
actually think about what happened and, you know, the state of the world at the time that happened, state of the world now. Think about it more contextually. And so I think, like, I know Checkr, for example, is a company that does that. There are other companies out there who, you know, are pretty public about their commitment to fair chance hiring. So I think probably trying to target those companies specifically that have demonstrated a willingness to consider people with, you know, even more serious records um, is probably a good idea.
Awesome, thank you. Brenda, you were going to jump in. Did you have something to add here?
I was just going to piggyback off of Berkeley that the candidate stories are so important. I know it's not always the case, but we have seen sex offenders write in and say, you know, this was consensual, her mom just got really upset, things like that. So, you know, candidate stories are important, but the assessed product as well, and making sure that um, the background check aligns with the role being applied for.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Okay. There's actually a question specifically for you, Berkeley. Does pretrial diversion, I should say, show up on a background check as an actual felony or pending felony? That's a very technical one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's probably not a blanket answer to that necessarily, and I don't want to start speaking about how our product would classify things on the fly because my understanding is, you know, it tries to get better and better and better over time. So I'm not sure. I mean, if that's a super important question to you, I'm happy to look it up and, you know, email whoever it is that's asking it. With that.
Awesome. Okay. Jody, go ahead.
I was going to share a few thoughts here. Now, I know employers are, in certain regions, employers are informed that they're not allowed to consider certain types of conviction or arrest records, right? Or pretrial diversion or records for something that has been expunged or acts that have been decriminalized, etc. But candidates are often like not aware of this either. That like actually X kind of crimes can be considered, X kind of classifications can be considered. And so we try to inform the candidate of that too. So even if this stuff does appear on the report, like legally in certain jurisdictions, the employer like cannot consider it, right? If it like if you do have Checkr, so I'll give you an example at like Reddit. I told the HR manager essentially that I'd gotten in trouble when I was a kid. I was 14 years old. It's gonna show up. And she was like, well, actually, the way we configured our like system with Checkr is there's a look back period in San Francisco because that's where I was being recruited at. And 7 years, this is over 7 years ago. And she was like, it's actually not even going to show up just because how we have it configured. You know, and so I think things like that are, if the candidate's aware of it and the HR manager is now informed, right? Because they're world of labor, right? They're labor laws. They're not trying to, you know, woefully violate them or yeah. So I think it's helpful for candidates to be aware of that too, just to have the legal intelligence as you're making your case.
You know, that's actually a great anecdote there, Jody, because it sounds like the HR manager was well informed, right? And in some regard, I'm curious to hear how that feedback that you received impacted you as the job candidate who maybe may have been nervous to talk about your background. How did that response impact you? Just curious to hear your thoughts on that.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, I was super nervous. I'd already like failed 30 background checks. Like I get an interview and I'd get hired and then I failed a background check, so I couldn't make it to the final stage. So incredibly nervous. I think at this point, it was either I get a job or I go back to prison, right?
Yes.
Part of my is a parole. Although I had graduated from school, like, you know, rules are rules. And so I think I explained this to the hiring manager, like, this means a little bit more to me than it would otherwise. Fabulous company for sure. You know, love to be in tech and startups, but like my life is kind of on the line here, like my future. And then they also knew the law. They also realized, well, we wouldn't have wanted to hire you if you weren't talented. So we definitely want to recruit you. Like, I don't want to waste all this time either, right? I've been through 4 interviews, did 2 on-sites, you know, all kinds of tests. And so the HR managers wanted to get the deal done too. And how can we get the deal done? Okay, there are these laws we can leverage. Okay, here's how the background check matrix is like configured. Okay, you don't have to say anything about this, but like you can say something about this. We're going to consider this, and really help me put together a package to go to the final supervisor or the regional manager.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Literally, you got the HR folks to start advocating for you, right?
Yeah, you know, sure.
I love it. I love it. That's awesome. So anyway, we're gonna wrap up now because we have like 2 minutes left. So if you have like 30 seconds, I'm curious to hear what you guys have to share. There's a question here that I think is a good thing to conclude our time, which is from Courtney, and it says, how can we partner with Rezme to assist us with our clients who do not pass a background check or are on a case-by-case basis, right? And I'll just extend the same thing to Checkr as well. How can providers in the room, so to say, partner with you guys? So Rezme, we'll have you start first, Jody, and then someone from Checkr could speak briefly.
You got it. I think Kimberly's going to throw up the actual slide that has our information. There it is. But if you go to the website or hit us up directly, like I will always respond. It doesn't matter if you live in a state or a city with fair chance hiring ordinances. We're always looking to help individuals overcome background check failures, or even questions of their character or other barriers related to their justice involvement. Like, we want to be a part of that process, and we also want to learn what you're seeing on the ground so we can build more products.
Awesome. Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. Anyone from Checkr, any thoughts? And how can folks get, I mean, obviously your information is here. I'm just curious to share here if you need to share anything else. If not, go ahead, Brenda.
I was going to say, I don't have anything else to share.
Awesome. Well, folks, thank you so much for joining today's webinar. Before you go, please remember, we're going to be sending you a link for you to take our survey. We would love to get your feedback on this session. I want to say a heartfelt thank you to Brenda, Berkeley, and Jody for giving up your time. Really appreciate your contribution to the field. Thanks to Kimberly as well, who's been working behind the scene. Before you jump back, I do want you to know that our conference will actually be on October 22nd to the 24th at the Wyndham Grand Hotel in Pittsburgh. We're going to have a ton of folks there. We have over 100 speakers that will be speaking, sharing their learnings. And we also have roughly about over 500 folks that we're expecting to join. So please do not miss out. This is now more than ever is the time where we need to be connecting. Again, thanks folks for joining. Really appreciate your time. And you could be doing so many other things, but you decided to join us today. Thank you so much.